Hello, career thought leaders. Hello, hello. There we go. Hopefully that's a good sound now. We are going to be talking about how you can help your clients transition their resume without getting into the generic junk. So I'm seeing a lot of prompts out there on the internet that sound great, but what's going to happen with them is people are going to get generic language, and now maybe they don't sound federal or military or like a teacher, but they just sound like nothing. And that doesn't help them either, especially when we're talking to employers and hiring managers who want to plug someone in that can be effective right away. Or of course, you've got the resume parsing systems, which aren't going to eliminate people, but they might score someone's resume, and they aren't going to score it well if we're just translating into business language, which I honestly think is why people struggle, is because that really doesn't exist. When you're transitioning from federal or from military, business language is what you think, or corporate language. I hear that, I see that, but that's not reality. Reality is a specific audience, and we're going to talk about that today, and a quick framework you can use to help your clients identify that audience and be specific in how they speak to that audience. So that's where we're headed today. Say hello in the chat. Let me know that you're joining me. And as we go, please comment, ask questions, share your insights, and we'll move forward together. So one of the things that I've been seeing online that I think is a good idea, it's a great idea, is that you can take your old performance reviews and put them into something like ChatGPT and ask it to identify your top accomplishments. The problem with that is that doing it in a vacuum is not going to get you anywhere. So if I take my DD 214 or my federal documents that have my performance reviews, if I put that into ChatGPT and I say, give me my top 6 accomplishments, to what? Towards what? That's relevant to what, right? It doesn't do anything except for get it down a little bit, but it could be choosing the wrong things if you don't give it the context of an audience. So I know that one of the things we see when we talk about prompts and putting in a good prompts is this idea of context. I've got to tell you that context is not act like a resume writer or you're a hiring manager. That is not context. That is something that sounds good for a prompt person to sell a prompt, but it's actually not going to help you. What do you need? Here's the 4 things I have us think about when we're talking about context for job search. So for resumes, interviewing, networking, even target companies to some extent. Here's 4 areas of context we need to think about. The top level is industry. What industry are you targeting? This is incredibly important if we are working with clients who are transitioning like from federal to corporate, right? Corporate doesn't exist. What industry are we talking about? Because every industry talks very different. We're talking nonprofit versus healthcare versus manufacturing versus, whatever. Those industries have different languages, different challenges, different things they're looking for in the same type of role, but it's going to be different for industry. So that's the top level of context that our client needs to have, especially when we're talking about resumes, job search, finding target companies, et cetera. We can use AI to do all those things, but we can't do it if we're not clear on industry, top level. Then the next level is role. What is the role of your hiring manager? Because when we're talking about getting AI to like create a persona for your hiring manager, you have to know the industry and the role. So for instance, if I'm looking to move out of accounting in the federal government and I want to move into accounting in corporate environments, identify the industry. Okay, I'm looking for a manufacturing, or maybe I'm looking at nonprofit. Then I'm identifying the role of the person that will hire me. This is going to change based on industry most of the time, right? If I'm going in nonprofit, it might be the executive director that's hiring, depending on the size. It might be, a program manager that's hiring me, an operations manager, perhaps. In manufacturing, it's most likely going to be maybe a VP of operations or an accounting leader, depending on how many levels there are, how big the company is. So I've got to identify that. Why? Because then I can ask for what their specific challenges and needs are. And we'll go through the prompt here in just a minute, but these are the levels. So you got industry, you got role, you've got company. So especially when you're writing a resume, you should know the company you're aiming for when you get down to the actual application of that. In the beginning, when you're creating more of like that general resume, you at least got to know industry and role and then write a specific resume for each industry that you're targeting. This is really important, especially when you're transitioning, because you can't write the language of the target audience if you don't know that piece. You might have to have 2 or 3 resumes, right? One for accounting and manufacturing, one for accounting and healthcare, because they're going to have very different language in those resumes. Then, all right, so we've got industry, company, role of the hiring manager, and then person. Now, at this level, we usually don't get that granular with a persona of the hiring manager until we're interviewing. But I just wanted to lay out the whole model in terms of the framework when we're creating a buyer persona or a customer avatar for a hiring manager. And I recommend that you help job seekers do this for any job search activity they're doing where they're coming up with messaging. So if I'm creating interview questions and answers or mock interview stuff, if I'm writing a resume, even a LinkedIn profile, although you need it to be a little bit broader, it's going to be easier and more effective if you're thinking about the audience first. So here's how the flow chart might look. So I'm helping a client develop a resume, and they want to move from federal to, let's say, manufacturing, just for fun here. So they've seen that there's some manufacturing coming back in their local area. Maybe there's some plants opening up or something. And so they want to make that move. And so they're looking at their resume. They're looking at maybe their federal resume, which includes a lot of stuff, or they're looking at their federal performance evaluations, which can be a goldmine. Before you put any of that into AI, start with the context. And here's the context. So I am targeting accounting roles in manufacturing industries. Some of my target companies include, and this can be helpful because then it narrows it down even more. So I'm going to start at that industry level. What are the challenges and trends affecting the industry right now? And then I could take that deeper. How are they impacting an accounting role, right? That's the role piece. And then what is my hiring manager most concerned about right now? So what is a VP of accounting in these manufacturing companies most concerned about right now? And so we're scaffolding downward, right? We start with the industry. What are the challenges, trends, what's going on? And AI does a really good job of that, right? Because it's got the news, especially if it's connected to the internet. But even if it's not, it's got the news from 6 months ago, which is okay, right? It's not bad. I encourage people to use the free versions as much as possible. Free versions, for the most part, do connect to the internet. But if you don't have access, use a model that doesn't. You'll be okay. So we're starting with that big picture. What's the trends? What's the industry? What's the challenge? Then moving down to role. So what are the challenges related to accounting? What would a VP of operations or a director of accounting be most concerned about right now? And it'll lay that all out for you. It's amazing. Then you put in your content and you say, here's my performance reviews based on what are the challenges and the concerns of the industry. What are the top accomplishments I should be speaking to out of my work history? Now you've got the connection from the beginning, and it's pulling out the things that are relevant, and relevance makes them compelling. Like, yes, I want to call you, versus if I'm just asking it to pull out my accomplishments. Those may be great, but if they aren't relevant, they won't be compelling. Nobody's calling me. I'm not getting through, the scoring systems, if that's a consideration. But it's really even not about that. It's about the human on the other end. So if I start at the beginning with the audience, their challenges, their problems, what keeps them up at night. And yes, if I'm writing to a specific job or I have a few job descriptions, I can put those job descriptions in and add them to that context piece before I put in my stuff and have it prioritize make suggestions, find gaps. AI can do all of that really well when we set the context, but we don't want to try to do it in a black hole, because all then we're doing is getting more generic junk. And AI it's awesome at generic junk. That's what it's built on. It's got billions and billions and billions and billions of data points of generic junk. That's what it does. So if you don't want platitudes and overused phrases and those types of things just plaguing your content, you've got to start with the context of the audience, the industry, the challenges, the hiring manager, their role, what they really care about, and then, yes, the job description. Then you can upload your content and ask it to pick out the things that are most relevant to the audience. Now, you want to keep your brain engaged. It is not going to do it for you. It's going to help you. So you keep your brain engaged, or you're using a professional writer or whatever. Most of them can't help but keep their brain engaged because they've been doing this for so long, right? And so they're thinking, how do they connect the dots? Here's the other I know you want to, I know we all want an easy button. Please don't have AI do too much writing for you. So if you ask it to take your accomplishments and write them for you, be very careful, because again, it makes it more generic. It waters it down. It brings in all of those overused phrases, and the best prompting in the world is not going to stop it from doing that, because that's the data set it's built on. That's the data set it's trained on. So prompts can make it better, but you're still going to have to watch out for that. So I'd encourage you, it might point out your top stories. You still want to engage your brain and think about, okay, what are the stories here? And then is there anything that wasn't on there, that wasn't in there, that you see like, oh, wait, here's the pattern of what it's pointing out, of what it's looking for, of the accomplishments, the gaps, those types of things it wants. And you want to think like, is there anything else that wasn't in the DDT 14 or wasn't in my old federal resume or wasn't in my performance reviews that I could stick in here, because now I see what the challenges, problems, concerns are. And I can find those other stories that really demonstrate my ability to meet that need. Then, of course, you're going to look at language, and AI can help you with that, but you want to be careful with it. So I've built my context, my persona of the industry, the hiring manager. I can put in a job description. Then I put in my content, my resume, and you obviously don't include any personal information. No name, address, phone, email, none of that needs to go in. In fact, you can even eliminate the names of the places you've worked if you want to. That doesn't really matter. That it doesn't need companies and dates. You can just put in the content, the actual bullet points and stories of what you've done. You can ask it to identify your top ones, ask it to identify any gaps. You can ask it to do some rewriting from one industry to the next, but you just want to be careful there, because again, it brings in the generic junk. And sometimes it does this really weird thing where it writes a bullet and then it says like, demonstrating my skill in ... Be careful with those. Most of the time you don't want that. It's weird. It doesn't belong in a resume. Like, the statement should demonstrate your skill, not some weird part of the statement that says demonstrating my skill in blah, 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 right? So we want to take those ideas and the dots it's trying to connect, but reword the sentence so that the actual sentence demonstrates that skill, not some weird call out at the end of the sentence. So beware of that as you're moving through the process. And then you're putting it together, picking what matters, prioritizing the things that are most relevant, most compelling. So you're going to go back and look at those trends, challenges, job description analysis. And after you've written your bullet, you're analyzing it again yourself. What bullets are the most compelling? Is the language connecting from the beginning, the job descriptions, to the resume output? And most of all, is it specific to you, things you actually did? Is there any way you can quantify it? And you can ask AI that, right? So you get into some bullets, you say, what could I ask myself to make sure I've quantified everything I could quantify? And it will give you some ideas. Be careful though, because even there, I've seen people quantify things that don't make sense, or that are weird, like achieved 90% of X, when you would fully expect that if it wasn't 100%, you would get fired, right? So be careful of those things where it is encouraging you and helping you to quantify, but you got to keep your brain engaged and make sure that it makes sense and that it would be what a hiring manager would expect. That's your job, right? Is at the end to make sure that it's prioritized, that the words are relevant, that it connects back to the audience's needs, and that it is specific, true, real. We were having a meeting with some of our resume writers, and someone said, so we were kind of having this new discussion about should you have your resume on your LinkedIn profile or not? Because we used to say no, you want the hiring manager to reach out with you. Now we've kind of said, well, maybe in specific cases where you really are focused and you've got a good, clear focus, you might want to put a modified resume up there that has very little contact info and maybe even some company names that are anonymized if necessary or something, or data that's anonymized if necessary. But still, you don't want to have a generic, right? We don't want it to be generic, which means no one should be able to copy things from your resume and paste it onto theirs. Maybe little tiny bits and pieces, maybe a bullet here or there. But if there's a large chunk of your resume that someone in your industry could copy and paste to theirs, we haven't done our work to make it specific about you, your stories, your accomplishments, the things you actually did in your job. And AI is notorious for making your content more generic. So at the end of the day, you should read it and you should think, is this what I actually did? Could someone else in my industry copy this? And if they could, how could I make it more specific to what I did, what I accomplished, how I did it, right? My approach, my style, which is usually just a few words. We don't want to get overly verbose on that, but there should be something in each bullet that is unique to you, either the accomplishment, the scope, the quantifiables, or a few words that are the style, the approach, the how, the method, the structure. Recruiters tell me that they love that stuff, right? Because I get to see how you work. It just has to be kept short so that it's not overwhelming. But I should not be able to copy your resume content, your LinkedIn profile content, and especially your summary of your resume. That should not be able to be copied and be put on anyone else's resume because it should be specific to you. And that's your goal when you get done with the resume. So we start with the audience in mind. That keeps us focused on what's compelling and relevant from the very beginning, both the industry, the role, the person who's going to be hiring you, maybe the job descriptions that you're specifically applying to, and then the company. When you get to that point where you're, really targeting a company, those are your context. Then you put in your stuff and you can ask it for help with what's relevant, what stands out. How do you need more things? You can even ask it to ask you questions so that you could get more accomplishments in there. And then at the end of the day, you're prioritizing, editing, connecting, and making sure that it's specific to what you've done. So we went through that 3-step process in a session last week. We're going to do it again live, but if you would like to get the recording now, you'd also be invited to join us live. If you're interested in that, drop me a link because that wasn't what I was planning on talking about today, but I just realized we went through the 3 steps. We do have a sandbox for career services providers to talk about AI, to get the prompts, to have it all down. We do monthly office hours. We have an enormous prompt library. It's really not about the prompts, it's about the process. And that's what we talk about in these sessions of how you can apply the process to do good work. Obviously, you can check out the YouTube playlist where I've put all of these Friday sessions. So if you go to the Career Thought Leaders YouTube, you'll see the Friday tech playlist, and you can go through there. Last time we talked about career counseling process. We've talked about job search. We've talked about all these things. Next week, we'll be talking about digital branding because we got some digital branding stuff coming up. But we'd love to see you in the sandbox. It's an annual investment that we've kept very low. If you are interested in that, have questions, challenges, concerns, reach out and let me know. Denise Spittler helps us run our sandbox, and we've just got a great group of experienced folks that gets together and talks about that. So let me see. Question. Profile, portfolio, resume. So your resume is the details. It's the nitty-gritty, that all the things you did. Your profile is your first person introduction to yourself. So especially your about section is that first person introduction to yourself. And then in the experience stories, in the experience section, you want stories that align with the things on your resume, but are likely more of the story than you could tell in your resume, because the resume is, again, all of the details. So in the experience section, I like to expand on the stories in someone's resume, maybe give a little bit more context, give a little bit more background, give a little bit of more of their style, their approach, those types of things that we can't work into the resume. And then the combination of things makes your portfolio, depending on what you mean by portfolio. I mean, a portfolio could be the work that you've done, work samples, or it could be, resume, bio, cover letter, case studies. All of those things could make up a very nice portfolio for you, depending on what your industry is and what makes sense to include in a portfolio. But definitely the difference between the profile and the resume is that your LinkedIn or other social media profiles are that first person introduction of you. What would you say about yourself if you met someone on the street, versus the resume being kind of the summary of that, the specifics that matter, and typically the targeted specifics that matter to the company that you're sending that resume to. And if you start with the end in mind, you shouldn't be spending a lot of time targeting, because you've got that focused audience in mind document from the beginning. Again, maybe having one for each industry that then you're just slightly tweaking to match the company's company's language, et cetera. I've heard some people say that you shouldn't target your resume, but I think that's really kind of ironic in this day and age where we're talking about the power of personalized marketing. Why would you not take the time and energy to do a little bit of personalization on that resume before you apply to a specific company? You shouldn't have to do a lot, I agree, because you should start with the end in mind. However, to take it with a really critical look before you apply, and to say, okay, if there's anything specific I can do to speak to this company specifically, I don't understand why you wouldn't do that. We all love personalized things that sound like they were just made for us, and employers are no different. Excellent. Yeah, so when you're writing the bullet points, again, we're starting with the end in mind. What am I aiming for? What is most important from what I've done that demonstrates those skills? And what usually makes career change resumes challenging is people have a hard time doing that. So we want to talk about what we've done, and it really doesn't matter. I want you to talk about the things that relate to the job descriptions you're targeting. So I eliminate all the junk. I'm not a huge fan of a master resume, because I don't really care what you've done in the past. I care what you've done in the past that shows you have the skills the employer's looking for right now. So if we start in the end with the end in mind, we say that, what is the industry challenge? What is the specific job looking for? What are the top skills they need? Then I'm picking from your background the things that demonstrate those skills. And I'm not picking everything. It doesn't matter. All the things don't matter. The things that matter are the things that match. And that's what we care about. So if we start with what the hiring manager really cares about, the job descriptions, the qualifications, the skills, the trends and industry challenges, we go and we say, okay, when have I done things? What have I done that demonstrates those skills, that demonstrates those needs? And then I put those things back into chronological order, but I don't need to keep everything that I've done. I keep the things that matter, and maybe a little bit around them to build the story or context. But I don't even really need to look at your old resume, because all we're doing is building the picture of the future based on the stories that matter, the stories that match. So if you're in a career transition, I would almost encourage you to set that old resume away, set it out, set it to the side for a while. Start with what matters. Think about when you've done the things that matter. When do you have accomplishments that show you've achieved the things that matter? Then put it in order. Then you might go back and look at that old resume and see, is there anything that I missed? Or is there any context I need to include that wasn't included for whatever reason while I was picking out my stories that matter? So the biggest challenge in a career change resume is that I think people start with their old resume and they're overwhelmed by all the stuff that's on there that really doesn't matter anymore. Set it aside, start over. Who cares? What do they care about? What do you have that shows they should care? And then if you go back to that old resume, you can rescue anything that might need rescuing, but be careful because you'll have a tendency to want to rescue things that really don't matter or match just because you've done them. And we have to be able to separate ourselves a little bit from that. All right. Well, I hope that was helpful. If you are in career services and you want some resources for using AI in your work, we've got our monthly office hours happening next Wednesday. Hop on in and join us. If you have questions on that, let me know, and we'll see you next Friday. So we're not doing third Friday this month because I've got a training. So we'll do next Friday. We're going to talk about some AI in digital branding. We'll see you then. Thank you, everyone.